Welcome to Books and Ideas Audio, a presentation of the Vancouver Writers Fest. The Vancouver Writers Fest connects people to exceptional books, ideas, and dialogue through year-round programming that ignites a passion for words and the world around us. I'm Leslie Hertig, Artistic Director, and I'm very happy to share this conversation featuring acclaimed American writer Walter Mosley in conversation with Festival of Literary Diversity Director and author Jael Richardson. This event was recorded live on October 19th, 2020, as part of the Vancouver Writers Festival. The Vancouver Writers Fest carries out its work, including this event you're about to listen to, on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. This event features Walter Mosley speaking about his new collection of stories, The Awkward Black Man. And as Kirkus Reviews said, the range and virtuosity of these stories makes this Mosley's most adventurous and maybe best book yet.
And being a Californian, I was a computer programmer and I'd been a cook and a potter and a whole bunch of stuff. And then one day I was working. I was a consultant programmer, so I was working on the weekend at Mobile Oil, 42nd Street in Manhattan. And nobody else was there. It was the weekend, and instead of writing on my program, I wrote a sentence. On hot, sticky days in southern Louisiana, the fire ants swarm. And I said, I've read books. That sounds kind of like a book, and it must be fiction because I've never been to Louisiana, never seen a fire ant, so I'm making it up. Let me see if I could be a writer. And so, maybe that's like 34 years ago, maybe 35, and I just started writing, and I would study with people, and I went to City College for a little bit in this master's program in writing. I didn't graduate or anything, but I was there, and I just started writing. But yeah, that was it.
That was it. You were hooked. It's like, well, and what I find so interesting, what I find so, inspiring, if I can use that word without sounding corny, is just the wide range of stories that you've told and the things that you've written. And I wonder, is there a preference for you about what you write at this stage in your career? Have you sort of said, okay, this is what I love, this is what I do, or is it always just whatever form comes?
Well, sometimes I've sold a book. I have a contract. Usually that's a mystery, and so I write that book. But for instance, when I was in this writer's room that I was talking about, I, I like the writer's room. I like writing television, but it doesn't satisfy me in the way that writing, prose does. So I started writing short stories. I would wake up in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'd work on a short story for like 3 hours, and then I do, my ablutions, and I go, to the room to write. And then that's how I came up with The Awkward Black Man. I was trying to do something that made me feel at least satisfied. So, and then I realized that I'm almost always talking about Black male heroes, but the point inside of that was that I was writing about Black male heroes that don't usually get written about.
Mm.
A guy, who's overweight, and he's saying, "Wow, God, I finally started losing weight." And he's, so that's the good thing. He said the bad thing is it was a little touch of cancer, so I had to deal with that. Those kinds of people that they're heroic in their own lives, like how we live. And that was lots of fun. Stories all the way back from the beginning of my career until maybe like 5 or 6 that I've written in the last couple of years. And
Yeah,
that was
so I wanted to talk about that.
We can
The
do it later.
compilation, the collection
Mhm.
is 17 stories, but they cover a wide range of time and over the course of your career. Many of them have been published in other places. What was it that made you want to bring these particular stories all together at this time?
I think it was that thing. I was up in the morning and I was writing, and I realized that I was writing about a certain kind of character. And I've been writing short stories, my whole life. I mean, one of the things about short stories in America, I'm not sure if it's true of the rest of the world. America has a lot of, all these writing programs in universities that are mainly there to make money for the university. You pay really way too much money for it, and it helps the university, pay for their other students. Um, but in the and but novels and those kinds of things are kind of controlled by the mainstream. People who are buying novels, uh, that's the major amount of money spent on fiction in America. The short stories, there's hardly any big venues. I mean, there's the New Yorker. I don't. That might be the only real regular venue for short stories. I'm saying that because the university, having kind of gotten the market on short stories, uh, support a certain kind of writing. I mean, it's not like, just one kind of story, but it's a certain kind of writing. And there are certain kinds of writers who, pass judgment on these stories. And what I write doesn't fit into that at all. I mean, at all. And so I said, well, I have all these stories, and mostly they've been rejected. So, but I know they're good stories, so I'll just put them together in a book, and then have people make a decision on it that way.
And I have one question, but before I do, I want to mention to everybody in this format, one of the things that you can do, first of all, is you can use the chat to ask questions. I'm not going to, we'll do that a little bit later in terms of going into the questions, but you can post them as they come to you. You can also see a little smiley face that says reactions, and you're welcome to use that at your discretion. If Walter says something profound, you can clap, you can give a thumbs up, you can give love. That is something that you can do just to continue to be a part of this process and conversation. Um, I did want to talk further, Walter, about the Awkward Black Man collection and these 17 stories in particular. And I wanted to pull on what you said about, first of all, were these the only 17 stories that you had, or were there some that you just said, nah, they don't quite fit into this
Yeah,
collection, or
there's
nah, I'm just going to shorten it?
there's about 40 stories, 45 maybe, that I have, and these ones fit together very well.
Mm,
And they seem to be about that guy, that kind of nerdy like guy who um might be really smart, might have a really one really great talent,
mm,
might be in some kind of strange, s- you know, development of a personality, based on maybe somebody else in his family, maybe his political ideas. I know in the last story, there's a guy, who he's just like, he will, won't be called an African American. He says, "Don't call me an African American." He said, "I'm not from Africa. My mother's not. Her mother's not. Her mother's not. Maybe somebody was. We don't know where they were from. And if we knew where they were from, they would be that kind of American slash American, like Malian American or
mhm,
Ethiopian American. You're not going to have, a continent. You have it for people from Africa and from Asia, but that makes no sense. You
mhm,
know, Franco Americans are Frenchmen. And he won't. He gets offered this great job, but he won't take the job because they called him an African American. He said, "Well, you must be talking about somebody else." That kind of guy.
mhm,
And as I put all those stories together, I just thought, wow, this is really cool. These 17 stories make it. It was, at
mhm,
first it was like 21, but I took out stories.
mm. And it's interesting you mentioned this story where he's sort of deflecting the African American, because there's actually a progression even in the language, the politics of blackness that follows the story. In one of the stories, I remember thinking like reading the word Negro and being like, oh my gosh, oh yeah, this is probably from
Mhm.
an older time where that was the term that was used. And then there's one where they sort of reference, which are who are now called African Americans. There's this interesting chronology of blackness as well in the stories. And it made me think about the title in particular. And I wanted to ask you about the Awkward Black Man as a title, and what those three words in particular, what stood out to you about those words together, whether there was any controversy or you had to fight for the title, or that was always, what you went with.
No, I've only once in my life that I have a problem with a title,
Mm.
um, and a publisher, because who else is going to argue with me? Um, but and at one time, that happened. No, but usually when I choose a title, it
It's it.
it fits well enough.
Mhm.
And Awkward Black Man, I think, it just really speaks just volumes, because you have um, you have all of these really kind of wonderful guys that live in these in the black neighborhood, or maybe not outside the black neighborhood, or do really interesting kind of jobs uh that we don't talk about, because it's not the impression of black men, especially in America. And that's just and it's so much fun to, like I have my little modern day Western in New York on the West Side, and I just love that. I love it that I can write a Western about because there's black cowboys, there's black everything, you know what I mean? And uh, it was so much fun to explore all the kind of avenues, all the personalities, all the emotions of blackness, and specifically black men. And I do that because black men don't really get covered like that in fiction. Even black women do, and I think that's wonderful.
Mhm.
Um, but you want to talk about people that you've known, that you've loved, that maybe raised you, maybe people that you hate, but just to show a different side of America. There's so many sides of America that get short shrift.
So many, and so many of the characters. I mean, it really is the perfect title in the fact that they're all even different amongst themselves. They're different from each other. They're different from what
Yeah.
we normally see, and the defining characteristic really is their awkwardness in the world, their awkwardness with each other. I mean, I think anyone who's reading this is going to find it hard to believe that these stories were rejected on some level, because they're just ah. I could say so much.
But,
I want to.
one of the things about being awkward is it's hard to fit in a world that doesn't accept you.
Mm,
Here you are, you're doing something, and you meet a guy, and he starts talking, you know, about the Renaissance,
mm,
and he starts talking about who was actually indeed the more important artist, Leonardo or Michelangelo.
mm,
And you just stop. You go, wait a second. This face is not supposed to be having this conversation with me.
mm.
This person is not doesn't I don't recognize that, I don't believe he knows what he's talking about. Even I've had that often with myself. And you just go, wow, if you can just open that up, and really honestly, if I could just open it up for black men, I'm happy right there. I mean, I don't mind if anybody else reads it and thinks about it and likes it and is moved by it. It's intended for that. But just for us among ourselves, other black guys to be talking about it, I think it's a very important um it's a really important thing,
Mhm.
because you don't want to get trapped and you say, well, I only have two or three different choices what I can do, with my personality in this world.
Yeah. I listened to an interview you did on Q, maybe quite recently.
Hmm.
And one of the things you said that I wanted to talk about a little bit builds on this. You said that it took a long time for Black men to find your work and read it, that
Hmm.
initially there was sort of a um, perception that Black men don't read, and then misrepresentation of Black men that maybe perpetuated this belief. But what do you think this collection offers that maybe differs from those Black men who found easy your stories about Easy Rollins? What is the awkward Black man offer that's different or build on for that audience that means so much to you?
Well, it does certainly. It couldn't have been my first book,
Mm,
because getting to this book is challenging in a way where people kind of seem like they're losers, or they don't, like they don't fit in the world, or they're not successful, they're not royalty, they're not rich, they're not the best fighters, uh and so, but I started off with Devil in a Blue Dress, right, with Easy Rollins. And I and I was writing about a black male hero, but he was a deeply flawed character, the kind of character that anybody who comes from any community recognizes. Like, yeah, well, he's not the best guy, So, well, yeah, no, some people don't like Al Capone, but you know, Al did a lot of stuff. He had that soup kitchen. I ate in it every day. Like that. That world. And I think in the beginning, like you were saying, Black men felt misrepresented in fiction, and so therefore weren't drawn to it. It's not like they didn't read or couldn't read or didn't want to read. It's just you would hear people say things like, well, I read nonfiction because I want to read the truth. I mean, little do they know is that the least truth is in nonfiction, right? Because you leave out so many facts.
Mm.
But I think that over maybe a 4 or 5 year period there in the beginning, from 1990 and 1995, I arrived for a lot of Black men where they would say, "Hey, I can read this. Yeah, I know Easy Wrongs. I know Mouse. I know this. I know." And from there, I could start going to other places. Have my book R.L.'s Dream about Robert Johnson. Then I started writing science fiction and all these various places that you could go.
Mm. Do you think about, I mean, you talk about that this couldn't have been your first book. Do you think about things in terms of mainstream and literary and how that works within your writing?
Um, well, I think about it. I mean, I'm in business. I sell books, so.
But there's some writers who like don't talk about the business. It's sort of like this I don't know, honor, or I don't know what they I'm very much into the business of writing. And so, I feel like that's a really interesting point that you're making, that it couldn't have been your first, but that it also creates a really important balance or a really
Well,
important
but
addition.
any person who's sitting down and they think to themselves, "I've written this brilliant book." Let's say somebody's thinking that, and then the next thought they have is, "I can't pay my rent." Like those two things are related.
Mm.
Like the brilliant book and not being able to pay my rent. Like, so you want to at least try to represent, like to get your work to a place where it gets represented. But I'm not even thinking about the commercial thing with this. I'm just was thinking about, if because I think The Awkward Black Man would have sold pretty well
Mm.
had it been my first book. But I don't think that I would have made inroads to a Black male audience that I really think is important, and I think is my audience, or is one of my audiences anyway.
Mm.
So it's a little bit commercial, which I like,
Yeah.
but it's more like I'm saying, well, I'm trying to open a door
Mm.
that people can read about it and think about it and say, hey, I recognize myself in there, or recognize my father in there, or I recognize my brother. My brother is really like this, they may say,
Mm.
right? And that's really wonderful if you can do it.
Mm. Well, and I think it's a skill. I mean, I've heard you talk about it, but I think about it a lot, the genre versus literary and what separates those two and why people
Mhm.
even bother with that. And I think sometimes it's about the cleanness of the line and really getting the writing so that it is both
Well, it
literary
has to
and
be both,
commercial.
right?
Yeah.
Listen, when you go in the history of fiction, definitely in English, but really in every other language too. Um, all the novels we talk about today that we say, oh, this is great, this is genius, this is towering, was originally popular.
Mm.
Charles Dickens, wait, he was the biggest seller in the world. Even really, I think America's greatest novelist, Herman Melville. Um, Herman Melville was writing big sea adventures. He wanted to do both. He wanted to go deep and write the adventures, which is what you have with Moby Dick, which didn't work financially for him. But he didn't care because that's what he was doing. He had a job. It didn't matter. But the idea is that some people say, well, popular means it's not literary. You know, and I would say, well, you could say that. I said, but just because it's literary doesn't mean it's good. There are a lot of literary novels that are bad books. You know, you try to, because you have character development, plot. You have an idea. You have a spirit. You have a form of language. You all of these things come together in anything that you write.
Mm. My friend had coined a term. I have to give her a shout out for this. Leonika Valsius. She came up with this term sweet spot fiction, which is like sort of the intersection of what people call, quote unquote literary and maybe more commercial. And it's a space where people can just really enjoy great writing, essentially, is how it breaks down. And there is that quality to each of the stories, like a real ability to grab the story. And also, I had my highlighter working like double overtime, just lines that I loved. There was a couple lines I was just like, oh, if I could write a sentence like that. I wondered about what you read growing up and how that's shaped the kinds of story, the way you tell stories. Because I think there's a particular way you tell stories that in all 17 stories really comes through. And I wondered about the influence that maybe shaped that.
Well, the influences are really interesting. For me, um, I think the my interesting my family background. My father's black man from Louisiana, then moved to Texas, where so I have a lot of Texans and Louisianans in my history. My mother's parents were Jews from Eastern Europe, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Russia. Uh, and Jewish, when you go back that far, Jewish people and black people at that time were having the same experience. They
Mhm.
all lived in ghettos. They were all hung and burned, treated as another race, not having political representation in the government, all that stuff. So that there was a lot of back and forth communication, between them, and so that this is me listening to stories, by old Jewish men talking about the shtetl, and by black men and talking about being, enslaved, talking about how they lived, how they ate in the South. Women who, I remember my aunt. She was the toughest woman. I was standing at her house. It was on New Year's Eve, and it was in Galveston, Texas. I was scared to death, and I couldn't go to sleep. And she said, "Walter, are you scared?" And I said, "Yes, I am, Henrietta." And and she said, "I got a 45 right here in my purse. Ain't nobody getting to you before they come through me, and ain't nobody getting through me." You
Mhm.
know, that is kind of like the nucleus of a story right there. Now, of course, I read all kinds of things. I read adventures, Treasure Island, and the Fantastic Four, and I mean that the literature you read as a child, is the best literature you're ever going to read. Ian Forster says that in aspects of the novel. Um, and then, later on, 100 Years of Solitude, The Simple Stories by Langston Hughes, all of these books, tons of science fiction. I mean, really, and some of the best and smartest writers ever, were writing science fiction. About imagine this. Now, okay, if you can imagine that, imagine this now. And it's like, oh my God, my mind is opening up. In these ways. Um, but I don't I reading and writing are obviously connected,
Yeah.
but I don't think they're reliant on each other. I know people who've read everything and can quote everything, can't write a word. I know people who hardly ever read at all, who write novels that just make me cry. It's a I think as a writer, you're trying to talk about the story. I mean, Charles Dickens, uh, was a big part of getting rid of debtor's prison in England, because he wrote about it so convincingly that people cried everywhere. Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin had everybody uh, talking about it, and it's not the literary history that informs that, but it's the history of a people that does, and I think that's where you come from in all those places. My father was a great storyteller. I love listening to him tell stories, and if anybody says, "Well, what's the biggest impact on you?" It was my father telling stories and my father listening to me telling stories.
Mhm. It's I mean you can hear that in your writing. You can see that on even on the page,
Mhm.
ironically. The storytelling and I think short story writing is a particular challenge. It has a particular skill to it that I mean I don't have. But I think it has this ability to tell a complete and interesting story in a short time frame in a short amount of space. And I want to pick on a few themes that
Mhm.
that I saw and some questions that I had. And
Okay.
one was about a theme of love or maybe anti-love. I was saying one thing that struck me among many of the protagonists in the story was a fractured view or a fractured experience with love, just like these very awkward love moments. And I wondered if that was an intention, a desire to push against notions of romance and love that we traditionally see in stories, or just about representations of love, if it was something you thought about or were aware of as you were creating each of these characters.
Well, one of one of the things that I do is I talk in both my little writing books and little thunder things is that you have to write every day.
Mm,
And the reason I think you should write every day uh, is in reference to a form of therapy that has gone out of fashion because it's not useful anymore as far as the mind is psychoanalysis. I
mm,
mean, I think Freud is a genius. I love Freud's work, but psychoanalysis itself was this developed for like hysterical symptoms,
mm,
which we don't have so much anymore. Um, and but the thing about it that was so wonderful, if you were in therapy for an hour today, you were going to be in it tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day and the next, forever. And what's so great about that is that every day you come back to it, there are new thoughts. You
mm.
didn't even know that there are new thoughts. You just sit down to write the next day. I'm talking about writing now, from therapy to writing. You sit down and start to write the next day, and you go, wow, this is really connected to this, and you start
Mm,
writing about that. And so when I'm writing these stories, subjects come up, things that I'm dealing with all the time,
mm,
and in my head, in my heart, in my memory, and they it's there, and it's certainly the theme of love throughout, not every story, but most
mhm,
of them. And a lot of it's kind of classic boy and girl kind of thing, but sometimes it's a love of a cousin or a brother or
yes.
a parent, or it's a man loving a woman, but not as a sexual object, as just as she represents the kind of turning point of his life.
Mm,
Um, that those are the kind of things that that are so much fun to write about, and so interesting and so different. I'm not talking about. I don't think any of the stories. I think maybe one where oh, the guy is just so perfect and beautiful and
mm.
this and that. And in that one he dies early. Uh, um, but
Spoiler.
it's not the thing that you would expect. Oh, I didn't tell him the name of the story.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's really important. And I wanted to say something else because you were talking about not writing short stories, and
Mm,
I did a introduction to the best short stories. I don't know, in the early 2000s, and it was fun to read stories because short stories are much more difficult than novels.
mhm,
If I had it sitting in front of me to write this short story, write this novel, I would definitely go to the novel because it's so
mm,
easier. Um, because a short story has all of the power, all of the impact, all of the history, all the meaning of a novel. Only most of it is not apparent. It's not there. It's not described. So, like, it's like if you looked at a mountain and you saw the whole mountain, extraordinary. It's beautiful. Or then you looked in the ocean and you saw an island and say, "Oh, that's a pretty little island there. It's just a little thing." And then you go, "Yeah, but there's a mountain under that island.
mm.
That island wouldn't be there if there wasn't a mountain under it holding it up." And you need all of that happening below the water in a short story, which is why making choices writing a short story is so difficult. In a novel, if a woman walks in and she's wearing a red dress, that's fine. She's wearing a red dress. In a novel, I mean, a short story, you go, why is she wearing that red dress?
Mhm.
What does that red dress mean with her relationship with her father, her mother, her brother, the job? It has to have everything has to work.
Yeah.
It's that complex. Anyways,
Yeah, it blows my mind. I think I wrote a short story for a collection recently, and it took me like a year to write one short
mhm,
story. So
yeah.
it blows my mind with a collection like this. And I'm really curious. I wanted to ask this question because I haven't done a collection before. Um, when you do a collection like this, are there favorites or is it like children? Like you love each and every one kind of the same, but for different reasons? You know, when you look at these 17 stories, is there one that you're like, ah, I could read that every day?
I mean, there's some. It's so interesting. There's some stories that I really like. I really like the Western, for instance. I really like that story, but I look at writing the way people look at classical music. Um, Opus, Chopin, Opus 26. Beethoven, Opus 32. It's all of it works together. You can't, you can cherry pick and say, I like this, I like that, I like this. But I know that I had to write all that other stuff in order to get there. I had to, you have to learn and you have to learn and you have to learn. And your learning is all those works. So like all my, books and short stories and plays and screenplays and all of those things, I think of as together, as they're all pieces of one much larger body of work.
Mm. And Carolyn asked a question that I know I'm supposed to wait till the end to take audience questions, but I think it's really relevant here. My question is like, or her question, and mixed with mine is the order. Was the order is it sequential? Is it an order that was very precise? Do you sort of want people to read it beginning to end as it's listed?
Yeah, I spent a long time wondering about the order of this.
Mm,
I mean, listen, I've written collections of short stories before. Usually, they're about the same character or the same world.
yeah.
My science fiction thing, Futureland, 9 stories about this world. So they had to be in an order because I was telling a bigger story. The Socrates stories, the Tempest Tales, any of those things, I keep, I needed an order. But for this book, it was not a sequential as far as time was concerned,
Mm,
or even characters, because a couple of characters, one or two appear more than once in these
mm,
stories. But I just wanted to put it in a kind of a like planets, orbiting. They needed to be in they needed to be in a certain place.
mm,
And but could I explain that? No, I don't think so.
mm. Just everybody read it in order.
Mm. Yeah, read it. I think reading it in order would be good.
I mean, I asked you about your favorite, but I have to say probably one of my favorites, just in terms of like, personal gasp and just compelling. I don't know, there was something about it. For me, was The Haunted, was one
Mm.
of my favorite stories. And just to give everybody a little bit of a sense of it, it's about a black man who's been rejected 1,000 times by a publisher. Um, and he dies and then the story becomes really interesting because it's about his career continuing on kind of posthumously. um and I needed to know when I read that. I was thinking about so many things about the way writing lives on after us, about the way rejection in publishing has affected people of color in particular. And then I noticed that you had started the program with City University, and I wondered about, how publishing has what you've seen in your career in publishing that you're still trying to address, to fix, to wrestle or rectify.
Hmm. Well, I think like if following the story of the haunted, we need to answer questions for ourselves first.
Mm,
And I think this is a really big issue. Like, because a lot of people say, well, I'm not getting published. My story isn't getting out there. I don't know, and very often that's true. But it doesn't give you, leeway to not be completely committed to your job as a writer, because your job as a writer is not impacted by the person who decides to publish you or not publish you. It affects other parts of your life, but not but if you're committed to your work, then you're gonna do that writing. So I think that's the first thing. And I think that really was true in the haunted. um and I belong to an organization now that I helped to start, called the Crime Writers of Color.
mm,
When I was first writing mysteries, there were about 9, Black mystery writers that I knew of, that we did things together. We went to different parts of the country and did events. This organization I'm in now has well over 200 members.
Mm.
So things have gotten a lot better. Then people are writing, people are getting published, people have a community that they can talk to that's incredibly supportive, rather than, that more competitive vein that comes in the literary world. Um, and I'm really, I'm happy about the way things are. Uh, I'm happy about the way things are going.
Mm.
We're not there yet. I mean, you live in America. People come up to me and they'll say, isn't it terrible how lately so many Black men are getting shot down in the streets of America? And I said, well, that's been going on every day for the last 400 years, right? And
Mhm.
they go, really? I said, yeah. You're just reacting to the telephone with a camera in it, but and there's, and I think that, so there's a lot that people have to pay attention to. But, a lot of doors have opened up. I mean, even though many people don't like it, one of the big things is hip hop music has really opened doors, because these Black musicians selling records directly to white, listeners, who therefore take on, say, oh my God, what are they talking about? They're talking about how tough it is to be Black. This happens to, if you're Black, that happens to you. I mean, even in the story where the guy goes to the market, the white girl tells the Black man, says, well, street person says, you walk that way, and all the police and the guards and everybody, they're going to be following you. I can steal anything.
Mhm.
And like that whole notion, which most people don't think about, is what we're dealing in the world. So what I'm trying to say is, I think that things are getting better,
Mm.
but they have not gotten where they need to be yet.
I'm going to ask one more question, and I was supposed to remind people regularly throughout. I forget all the time. But if you do have questions, post them in the chat in about 5 minutes. I'm going to start pulling questions from there. I have one more, and fittingly, it's about endings. Um, when it comes to endings, a number of your stories don't necessarily end ideally for, if ideal is a thing. And I wonder what your thinking, belief, or approach to endings is, how you know that you've got it, if there's a particular thing you want people to feel or experience, or if it's just sort of a place that you reach with the story.
Yeah, I'm less thinking about, the reader and their potential epiphanies, from stories, and more about the character or characters that I'm writing about.
Mm.
And if I can bring that character, like anyone else, unless they die, um, they're at a place, and they've had this struggle, they've had this competition, they've won it, they've lost it, they have whatever feelings they have about it, but then they're going to go to bed tonight, and they're going to wake up tomorrow morning and going to go to work. I mean, so it's I'm going to end it that night before they get up in the morning and go to work, because it's a here's a this is a moment here.
Mm.
um and so I like endings, just like I like my characters to be pedestrian,
Mm.
you know that it's not the end ever. It's not the end. It's just, this happens, but then all these other things are, still going on. And if I can make those things fit together for my main character, uh and hopefully some others in the story, then I'm happy.
Mm. There's something really, I think there's something intangible that happens with your endings that, like you
Hmm.
said, makes you want to turn the page and read the next story, even though they're not connected.
Yeah.
It makes you feel sort of satisfied with where you've been left without being like, sometimes I get angry at endings because I'm like, I don't have enough information. But I felt really genuinely satisfied at the end of these short stories. And I say this as someone who is, and I say this for those that are watching that are thinking about this, like I generally read do short stories. That's just like my practice. And
Hmm.
this was a really special collection for me, really special that I just really enjoyed each one. I like to go back and read some of them over again. I've been doing it for about 2 months, sort of picking up a short story at a time.
Mhm.
And so I want to say that to any short story skeptics that are out there. All right. So now we turn to the point where we're going to bring the audience even more into the conversation with questions that they've posed. And so I'm going to have a look through and pick a few. Almost
Hmm.
at the end. So it's been 13 years since this is from Program. It's been 13 years since you published your book. This year you write your novel. Is there any advice that you would add now?
Well, uh, uh, I mean, I don't want to sound, venal or anything, but I did just recently write and publish a book called "The Elements of Fiction."
Mm,
This year, you write your novel is. I think that everybody would benefit from writing a novel. Not everybody's going to write the kind of novel that people want to publish. That's maybe of the quality to be published. Uh, that might be great novel, but nobody wants to read that right now. I mean, but it's a basis of how what you do in a daily way to get to the end to write a novel. It's basic, but it's I think all things are basic. It's like cooking. If you don't know the basics of cooking, you're not going to make dinner.
mm,
Um, but the elements of fiction is how to put something unique in that novel, how to how you, and that's a really intangible thing,
mm,
how you get to a place where your novel is going to break off from the rest, what that world is. Elements of fiction is no longer than this year you write your novel, but I think that there's more to be said, and after 13 years of thinking about I was thinking about the what I say about plot, which I like. I like what I say about plot. I say that plot is the structure of revelation.
mm,
It is both pedestrian and ecstatic,
mm.
and um, and if you can figure that out in your own writing heart, then you can make a novel that's special.
My festival team is watching, and I'm hoping that they're writing these quotes down so that they can share them with me afterwards, because I'm like, ooh, I want to write that one down. Um, so another question from Bonnie is about the pandemic and whether you're writing more or less because of the pandemic, or whether a pandemic will feature in the plot of a novel as a backdrop.
I have a story that I've been kind of going back and forth to that'll have to do, you know, uh, I mean, I'm sure everybody in the world is saying this phrase, love in the time of COVID-19, but um, as a writer, I was in a writer's room, like I've said before, working on a television show when the COVID hit. Yeah, and really, I like being in a writer's room.
Mm,
But I also hate being in a writer's room. I mean, to go to a place every day and sit down for 8 hours with other people trying to tell them or them to tell you what you should be writing, it's grueling. I mean, it's hard. So when the pandemic came and I found myself stuck, in this room, this apartment, I went, "Wow, this is the way I felt, before I was in the writer's room. I'm
mm,
at home and I'm writing, and I love it. It's great. I mean, my life hasn't changed. I'm working more than I was, when I was in the writer's room, but not more than I was, 5 years ago, when I was just sitting in my house writing novels and
mm,
short stories and articles and letters."
mm. People are begging you to read your work, Walter. It's happening. How has creativity affected your prose? Um, do you read books while you're in the middle of a story, and does that affect what you write?
Hmm.
That's from Isabel. Thank you.
That's an interesting question. Um, and yes, I'm sure it does, but I have no idea how. I mean, I'm usually at that place where I don't know what I'm going to write tomorrow morning. I just don't know. I mean, I know what I'm going to what project I have in front of me, what book I'm writing, but I don't know what I'm going to write. And I get my imagination is piqued by what I wrote yesterday, but
Mm,
also with that, it's peaked by everything else that I experienced. So if I start reading about, Leonardo da Vinci,
mm,
and in the morning, tomorrow, something I was thinking about him might come into the work. Might. Um, I just don't know. When I'm writing a mystery, I don't read mysteries
mm,
because the plot of mysteries is kind of like subterranean,
mm.
and it can easily migrate into your own work, and then you've written somebody else's book, and that's not good.
Definitely not good. Okay, I have one more question, and if there aren't any more questions, this will be the last one. So I mean, I don't think I love how your novels are set inside particular moments. I love that we had a question about the pandemic because that's where we are right now. We're also in a particular political moment, particularly you in the United States with an election coming up. And I wonder how that affects you as a writer, whether it bleeds into the content, whether it affects your ability to engage, or whether you write more nonfiction or fiction, how the politics of the day affect how you come to the page.
Yeah, it's interesting. When Trump got elected, Saturday Night Live had a routine where there's like these four white people and these two black guys, and the white people were really upset about Trump. Oh my God, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. How could this have happened? We never imagined such a thing like this could happen. And the black guys are gonna say, "You haven't. This is the worst thing that ever happened to you." He said, My uncle got lynched." It's like, and so, you know, I kind of think that the way I feel about, well, the way I'm writing, what's unfolding, uh, is kind of the way that I think about my stories. Anyway, I think that a lot of stuff that we've gone through, I hate it, but I think we had to go through it. I think America needed to, to be able to go completely in the wrong direction and recognize that it's the wrong direction. Not only go there, but recognize it. And some people, out loud are saying, "This is wrong. This is awful. We got to fix it." Other people are saying, they're not saying it, but they think it. There's a lot of those Republicans there who are like going, "Oh my God, yes, this is we can't allow this to happen again." You know, uh, and it's interesting, and I live in a place where that it used to be that white, especially white men, had a leg up on everything. That's kind of the history of America, but capitalism has taken that away. Capitalism says, listen, I want to make as much money as I can off you and you and you. I don't care who you are. I don't care who you think you are. I don't care what you want. I'm going to make the money off of you. I'm not going to give you a special deal because of the color of your skin. Um, Now, a lot of people are upset. A lot of so-called white people in America are upset. Thinking that maybe people of color have a lot to do with taking away from them. Uh, but I think slowly, especially in the younger generation, people are learning. So no, that's not it. We're all in the same trouble together, and we got to work together. And so, if that becomes, the final answer, I'm going to be very happy. But that doesn't have anything to do with what I'm writing about. So, I mean, it's just me thinking.
Hmm. Do you look for places to like write about stuff like that when it's happening though? Or is it just does it just percolate? Because I'm always like, where do I put this stuff?
Well, yeah, I try not to have that thought
Mm,
because, it might flatten out.
mm,
Like, what I'm thinking. A lot of people are thinking what I'm thinking.
yeah.
And if we want to have a conversation about it or talk about it, I mean, I love that Dave Chappelle had a little special in this little town, and he was answering people saying, well, you should be getting out there, and being a leader for these people. And he's like, no, the people are doing great on their own.
Mm,
I should say they're doing great. That's wonderful. That's good. But Black Lives Matter is doing, they're doing really, the good stuff. I mean, awkward black man might be a spice for that, you
mhm.
know, but
I love that. Well, that is it for today. I want to do just like my last before Leslie comes on, or as Leslie comes back in to do closing remarks. I have two copies. This is my super beat up, many tabs, marked and highlighted all over, copy of The Awkward Black Man. I strongly recommend it. I think what you're going to find is people you don't know and recognize, but also people who are incredibly real and men who are incredibly funny and troublesome and all the things, all the word. I don't even have all the adjectives for it. But whether you're a novel reader normally or short story, find your independent bookstore. I think the Vancouver Writers People will post that there, but find a place to get this book. It's a treat.
You've been listening to Books and Ideas Audio, a presentation of the Vancouver Writers Fest. To hear more events like this one, please visit our website at writersfest.bc.ca.